Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. And sorry I've been not so regular with the stories lately, but my son Jason was in the hospital with some very serious conditions, and it just hasn't been possible. So I'm back today though, and we're reading again in the Ghosts of the Haunted Mansion D.J. Dillon book. So when we ended last time, I think a couple days ago, DJ had a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. So let's see what that might be. Chapter 4, The Warning. It's huge, Alfred cried, 3 stories tall and covers the whole top of the hill. That's called No Hope Hill, Alfred, Mrs. Keene explained. It got its name because miners said there was no hope of finding any gold there. So the pioneers started the cemetery up there because the land was useless. The mansion was built across the street much later. I wouldn't want a house across from an old creepy graveyard, DJ said solemnly, especially one as spooky as that house. The teacher chuckled. Though it hasn't had a coat of paint in a decade or more, underneath that peeling and flaking is genuine redwood. The house will last for another century or more with good care, and I plan to give it that. DJ asked, "What do they call that style of building, Mrs. Keene?" Actually, DJ, it's a combination of architectural styles popular here in the old days. The roof line, rear corner tower, and the detailing on most of the exterior is what's called Queen's Anne. But the hoods over the windows are called stick. And the roof fretwork and the front tower are called Second Empire. So let's find out what fretwork is, because I don't know. Fretwork, angular designs or bands within a border as ornament. Okay. DJ had heard of Queen Anne's buildings because there were lots of them in the mother lode. But he'd never heard of those other names. He stared at the rear corner tower. Mrs. Keene seemed to read his mind. That one is called a witch's hat. Looks to me more like an ice cream cone turned upside down. Too scary for ice cream, Alfred said. How big is this house anyway? 14 bedrooms plus many other rooms. I'll give you all a tour as soon as you've met Miss Hildren and all the others who live here. There was something exciting about being able to explore a spooky old place like this in the daylight, DJ thought, but he wouldn't want to do it at night. Sam Dillon's car topped the hill, passing the cemetery on the left and the open pasture on the right. There wasn't another house in sight. A barbed wire fence separated the mansion from the empty pasture. Dad pulled up to an immense iron gate. Through it, DJ could see a long, curving gravel driveway winding through live oaks and valley oaks towards the mansion. The gate's unlocked, Mr. Dillon, the teacher said. DJ jumped out to open it. His fast movements alarmed a mixed flock of domestic geese and guinea fowl. The honking and shrill, rocking cries could be heard for half a mile. DJ's eyes skimmed the mansion and the large open yard around it. There were lots of dense shrubs and long-established trees. He recognized evergreens like cedars and ponderosas, digger pines, mixed with winter bear, licumbar, red, and sugar maples. At the lower elevation, there was no familiar sugar pines and no snow. DJ pushed against the heavy wrought iron gates. They opened at the middle, swinging away and inside on protesting rusty hinges. When Dad had driven through, DJ closed the gate and jumped back into the car. He put his hand over his ears. "Those birds sure are noisy," Mrs. Keene explained. "Geese and guinea-fowl make the best watchdogs in the world. Nothing can get by them." "Better than dogs?" DJ asked. "At least in the daytime when they can see," said the teacher. "Look, here comes everybody from the house." DJ saw a tall, slender woman in a black dress and a white apron leading 3 men onto the nearest porch. They stopped at the edge of the driveway and waited. "That's my housekeeper, Mrs. Haredon," the teacher said. "The man behind her is the real estate salesman, Mr. Hatchett. The short, stocky young man is our handyman, B.B. Schwartwit. The older, bald man is Mr. Grabot. They were here as roomers and boarders before I bought the place, so they rented a room." As Dad stopped the car in front of the high step porch with its ornamental posts, DJ glanced behind the house to the barn. "Hey, there's someone else in uniform just going into that barn. That's Sheriff Cadwallader," Mrs. Keene exclaimed. DJ thought about his grandfather and jumped out of the car as soon as it had completely stopped. He turned to Hero in the back seat and commanded, "Stay." Mrs. Keene introduced everyone to the housekeeper. Mrs. Harrigan greeted each visitor warmly. "DJ?" she said, reaching out her hand to shake. "You're one of Mrs. Keene's students, I presume." When the boy nodded, the housekeeper turned to Alfred. "And you're Alfred. I imagine Mrs. Keene is very proud to have such a nice-looking boys in her class." DJ thought Mrs. Harrison was a little gushy, but she seemed sincere. The boy turned to look at the 3 men as his teacher introduced them. "This is Mr. Hatchett. He sells real estate. Sam's father is the one who disappeared on his way to this mansion. That's who called Sheriff Cadwell is looking for out by the barn." Hatchett reached out and shook Dad's hand. "Hope they find him soon, Mr. Dillon." "Thanks. Call me Sam." He shook hands with each of the other 2 men as Mrs. Keene presented them, but none of the 3 men offered to shake with DJ or Alfred. Hatchett merely nodded to each of the kids. The handyman, who looked like he might have been a professional football lineman, barely bobbed his head in acknowledgement of the introductions. Only the older, bald man seemed friendly. "Glad to meet you," he said with a quick smile. "I'm sorry about your missing relative. Well, if you excuse me, we have to get back to what we were doing." The 3 boarders retreated up the high steps and into the mansion. Mrs. Keene suggested showing her visitors around the grounds. She led the way toward the back of the mansion. DJ fell in step beside his best friend to whisper, "Not very friendly, are they, Alfred?" "Brrr," Alfred whispered back. except for the housekeeper and that bald man. They sure didn't make us welcome. Wonder why? Good question, DJ answered as the teacher rounded the corner of the house and raised her voice slightly. That's the barn back there, of course. Nothing in it anymore. There's a woodshed behind it, old chicken houses off to the right, no chickens anymore, and the former harness shed is now used as a garage. You boys may want to explore that later. First, we'll tour inside the mansion. As they started to turn back, the uniformed officer walked out of the barn and approached the group. He was a very skinny man, quite tall, wearing a khaki uniform and quilted jacket zippered shut against the cold. A revolver rode on his left hip. The man had big bags under his eyes, and the skin under his chin was so loose it waddled. Waddle, waddle, waddle. He reminded DJ of a mournful-looking bloodhound. The housekeeper introduced him as Sheriff Cadwallader. Sam Dillon, the officer said, shaking hands with Dad. You must be the relative who filed the missing persons report on Caleb Dillon. Yes, he's my father. DJ's grandfather, Sam replied. The sheriff at Timbergold County asked me to keep an eye out for the old gentleman, so with the permission of Mrs. Harridan here, I've been looking around. DJ exclaimed, Did you find him? Sheriff's big brown eyes looked from his sad-looking face. Sorry, not a sign. Well now, don't look so downhearted, DJ. I have ascertained from the bus driver in Devil's Law that Mr. Dillon did get off there. But there's only one taxi in town with one driver, and he didn't remember driving anyone out here that day. Mrs. Harridan asked, Could he have hitchhiked? Dad shook his head, and DJ agreed. Grandpa wasn't a hitchhiker. Sheriff continued, There's no evidence that he got this far, so maybe he wandered off somewhere when he got off the bus. No offense, but old people sometimes do get a little absent-minded. DJ spoke sharply. There's nothing wrong with Grandpa's mind. I didn't say there was, the sheriff replied mildly. It's rare, but sometimes people get amnesia. Often older people just get confused and wander off on their own. We usually find them in a couple days. Sam Dillon said softly, He's not like that. That's why I'm afraid something bad has happened to him. Well, Mr. Dillon, we don't have a lot of crime in this county. I don't think he's in any danger. I've got to get back to town now. I'll keep looking and keep you posted. DJ watched the officer walk to a four-wheel drive station wagon he parked behind the garage. He waved to them as he drove toward the gate. DJ thought Mrs. Keene was trying to ease the tension when she asked, Mrs. Hilden, would you mind fixing hot drinks while I give our guests a quick tour of the mansion's interior? I was just going to suggest the same thing. It's cold out here. Coffee and hot chocolate fine with everyone? The inside of the house was dark, cold, and spooky. DJ immediately caught a whiff of a smell he couldn't quite place. Alfred sniffed and whispered, Smells like bacon and dust. DJ inhaled deeply. Following the two women, yeah, that's what it is, all right. Bacon and dust. Not just musty, like most old houses smell. Mrs. Keynes explained that she was going to paint everything a lighter color, install brighter lights and electric wall heaters in every room. She'd already installed them in the second floor bedroom. In each second floor bedroom. Almost every room in the house was kept closed off in the winter, since the wood-burning kitchen stove and the stove in the living room couldn't really heat the whole house. DJ was glad he had still had on his coat as his teacher led the way through the maze of rooms on the ground floor. Each had a 12-foot high ceilings. That's really tall. All the rooms were larger than any house DJ had ever seen. The formal dining room and great living room held massive dark pieces of furniture. Mrs. Keene explained that the tables, chairs, china cabinets, and highboys were all handmade antiques and at least 100 years old. Wonder what a highboy is. I think we better find out. Highboy, another name for a tall chest of drawers with legs. Okay, now we know. The living room was fairly warm because it was heated by a big wood-burning stove. Every wall held photographs of older, full-bearded men and sad-looking women with high collars. Their hair was parted in the middle, kind of like mine, and pulled down most severely on both sides of their heads. DJ thought that not one of those pictured people could have been happy. Which one's the colonel who lived here during the Civil War? DJ asked. I don't know, the teacher replied. None of these pictures is named or dated. However, I do recognize that steel etching of General Robert E. Lee in profile. The boys stopped to look at the Civil War general. Both agreed they wouldn't have recognized him from the side view. The tour moved from the warm living room down the cold, dark hall to the foot of the staircase in the middle of the first floor. As DJ followed the others up those steep, curving steps, he ran his hands along the smooth, dark mahogany banisters. Oh, mahogany is a beautiful colored wood. There was a landing at the top with a wall phone. There were long, wide hallways on both the right and left side of the stairs. Mrs. Keene explained there are 8 bedrooms on this floor and 6 on the third. She pointed to more stairs going up to the 3rd floor, but they were blocked by a chain. There's a lot of dry rot and other problems on the 3rd floor, so it's not safe to go up there yet. Besides, Miss Harrison hasn't finished with rewiring it. I'll just give you a quick peek on the 2nd floor. Alfred asked, did Mrs. Harrington really do all the rewiring? Mrs. Keene smiled. Oh, yes. She's very handy in a lot of ways around the house. DJ and Alfred exchanged grins, then turned their attention back to Mrs. Keene. Teacher said there were 4 bedrooms. Did I lose a place? Yes, I did. To the left, DJ could see 2 doors on both sides of the dark hallway, lit by a single small overhead bulb. Mrs. Keene said there were the 3 boarders lived in that wing with 1 room at the far end and kept locked as a storage area. Down this way, Mrs. Keene added, leading the way to the right, we've got 4 more bedrooms. Miss Harrington has the first one to the right. The 3 other are ready for occupancy. If you children were going to spend stay overnight, these would be yours. Mrs. Keene opened the 3 doors, flipping on bright modern lighting fixtures that looked old-fashioned to keep the period atmosphere of the mansion. DJ took a quick look, noticing that the closed-off rooms were cold. The second on the right hand had closets larger than the Dillons' bathroom at home. The farthest bedroom across the hall had what she called an armoire. That's like a closet. She explained it was a movable cupboard or wardrobe with shelves and doors where clothes could be hung. Every room held heavy gilt picture frames, mostly rounded and ornately carved, hung from wires suspended from a small railing about 2 feet below the ceilings. Instead of pictures of people or downstairs, all the second floor pictures were pastoral scenes of waterfalls, pastures with horses, and flower gardens. Mrs. Keene closed the last door and started back down the dark hallway towards the landing. I've already invested heavily in restoring this mansion, as you can see from these rooms. When I finish with the 3rd floor, we'll have the largest bed and breakfast inn throughout Motherlode. She paused, then turned to look quickly at her guest. That is, if we don't lose it. But I'd gladly trade what I've got invested in this place just to know that Caleb is safe. DJ wished the teacher had shown them what was inside the 2 towers outside the house. DJ asked, "What's inside the towers?" Mrs. Keene frowned. "I'm not really sure. Miss Harridan says they're not safe up there, so I've never looked. I think she said there's some old junk such as you find in an attic." DJ was still curious. "How do you get up inside those towers?" Mrs. Keene paused at the top of the stairs. "You'd have to ask Mrs. Harrington. I don't go near the towers. You might get hurt." "Well, let's go back downstairs." As the boys trailed the adults starting down the stairs, DJ whispered to Alfred, "I'd like to take a look around those empty rooms, especially the one locked at the far end of the boarder's wing and on the 3rd floor." "You think your grandfather's up there?" Alfred whispered, turning to look upward. "I don't think so. It's too cold. Maybe there's a portable heater up there." "You heard what Miss Keene said. The wiring is not safe." DJ nodded and raised his voice with another idea. "Mrs. Keene, is it true that the colonel who owned this place kept slaves even after the Civil War?" The teacher paused in the stairway and looked back up. "That's one of the stories handed down from the past. But I've never seen anything more exciting around here than a small cellar." "Cellar?" DJ echoed. "Could Alfred and I see it?" "Not right now. It's under the kitchen, and it was used to keep things cool before refrigeration. Well, let's get out of these cold hallways and have our hot drinks in the kitchen where it's warm." DJ was restless and anxious to find Grandpa. When he entered the kitchen, he asked, "Mrs. Keene, would it be all right if Alfred and I go exploring some more?" "Why, I suppose so, if it's agreeable with your father." Sam Dillon nodded, so the boys quickly drank their hot chocolate and walked out towards the barn. Alfred glanced back at the great bulk of the old mansion. "Gives me the creeps," he exclaimed, "like it had a secret or something." "Yeah," DJ agreed. I wonder why those 3 men who live here weren't more friendly a while ago. Maybe they've got secrets too. All 3 of them? The friends were passing an immense old cedar tree with a trunk that was at least 3 feet wide. Now, with me, if I want to measure 3 feet, I go from my fingertip, I stretch my arm all the way out in the middle of my chest. That's 3 feet. Interesting, huh? Let's see. Hey, boys. The voice was low, almost a hiss. DJ and Alfred stopped suddenly and glanced towards the tree. It was so big they couldn't see anything except a man's brown shoes sticking up from an exposed root on the far side of the trunk. Don't look this way. The voice was a hoarse whisper now. Look toward the barn or something. The boys automatically obeyed. DJ started to ask, "Who are you?" But the voice cut him off. Take it from a friend. It's not safe around here. What? DJ asked, involuntarily looking at the big tree. He caught a glimpse of the man's face as he jerked back behind the big trunk. The voice was stronger, more urgent. You heard me. Go on to the barn or someplace as though nothing has happened. Then get back to the house and leave. Don't ever tell anyone about this, and don't ever come back. It's not healthy here. Now, just a minute, DJ exclaimed. We're guests of Mrs. Keene. She's our teacher, and she owns this place. We can go anywhere we want. Yeah, Alfred chimed in. We don't have to leave until we're good and ready. The man's voice came once more. You've been warned. Get out of here while you can. That's the end of chapter 4. A warning. Well, hope you enjoyed the story. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house, out of your house, of the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming, keep a story in your heart. And remember, I love you, I really do. But more importantly, God loves you, and He always will. All right, bye-bye for now.